So, I heard you're looking for a go-to source for entertainment.
Wait for it.
Gaming?
Wait for it.
Anime?
Plus Ultra!
Mr. Eric Almighty and Phil the Filipino? Yeah, they've got you covered. And all you gotta do is... wait for it. This is the Wait For It podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wait For It podcast. I am your co-host, Phil Barrera, aka Phil the Filipino. And joining me as always is your other co-host, Mr. Eric Almighty. And Eric, we are here with the November edition of the Game Room Where It Happens. And you and I have had, a discussion over the last few months. The Game Room episodes have been a little bit of a mixed bag here in 2024, to put it lightly. And we wanted to turn a corner a little bit and make sure we gave people a little bit more of an upbeat and positive episode for the Game Room Where It Happens, because contrary to maybe popular belief to some people that might listen to, like, say, a 45-second clip on TikTok or something like that, we do like video games, and there are games that we very much have enjoyed in the past and in our current, but we are going to actually take a trip down memory lane with this episode here today, Eric, for a game that we hold very near and dear to our heart, despite us not necessarily being the biggest fans of the franchise as a whole. So I'm very interested to see what kind of comments come out of this episode and what kind of feedback, because I have learned in researching this episode, there are very specific camps, I think, like us, that say this is one of the most fun games and probably the best Saints Row game in the series, and another camp of very dedicated hardcore fans that say this is where the series, for lack of a better term, jumped the shark. So I think, and I hope, we hear from both parties, but because we very much fall in the camp of, boy, what a great time Saints Row the Third was.
It'll be interesting, to say the least. I think this is a much-needed kind of boost to our morale when it comes to trying games that are outside of our comfort zone. Because, Phil, this was a game that we, or at least I will say me, as someone completely new to the franchise, went out of my comfort zone to kind of play. Yes, is it kind of GTA-ish? Sure. But this game proved to be quite a different experience, and one that I really enjoyed, even though, again, it wasn't my normal type of game that I would jump into normally. So it's nice to kind of reminisce back into a simpler time where you could try a game, you weren't sure if you'd like it, and it ended up being one of those classics you remember for a long time.
Yeah, back to the glory days of the Xbox 360. Man, what a time. So very excited to jump into this conversation. So for all of you brand new listeners and returning listeners, welcome back to the Wait For It podcast and this edition of the Game Room Where It Happens. If you want to know where you can find all the rest of our content, as well as our social media pages, make sure you stick around to the very end of the episode. We'll let you know where you can find all of that. But with that being said, Eric, let's get to it here. Saints Row the Third, released in 2011. Quick synopsis of the game: a bank heist gone wrong leaves the Saints broken and lusting for revenge. They take the fight right to the source, the city of Steelport. Expanding their influence from the ground up, they will make allies and conquer the different hoods, building up momentum to take down the syndicate. So, Eric, we in the pre-show we were discussing kind of our history with this show. You had never played any of the Saints Row games prior to this. I had dabbled in 1 and 2 a little bit, and this was certainly a time where everybody and every single publisher, developer was trying to come up with a GTA clone. There's so many when you go down the list of all these games that try to replicate what GTA did. And I think the argument can be made that Saints Row 1 and 2 has probably been the most successful when you look at a collection of those games. I think maybe the only one that I think that comes close and maybe surpasses it is the very, very underlooked Sleeping Dogs game, which I think is something we should visit in the future. But Saints Row 1 and 2 certainly had instances where it was very silly, and one of the things I always think of is like there's missions where you can spray people with a sewage truck, and it seemed like that was the peak of silliness when it came to 1 and 2, but it still took itself very, very seriously, and I think that's why some people very much gravitated to 1 and 2, and that's why it's a little bit of a cult classic. Is there a specific reason that you never jumped into 1 and 2? Was it just because why would I need anything other than like a GTA 4? I think that was the Grand Theft Auto that was out at the time. Is it something that just didn't interest you, or what was it about the first 2 games that, led you to never check them out?
I think it should be first noted that I also wasn't a Grand Theft Auto like aficionado. Like, that was not a game. I remember like Vice City, San Andreas a little bit, but GTA 4 is really where I got my hands dirty when it came to the franchise, really digging into the game and going into every nook and cranny, enjoying the story and more in the game itself, where the others were casual playthroughs. So for me, it already wasn't a sandbox that I really was playing in. That being said, it might just be as simple as the cover, Phil. When you look at the cover of the game for Saints Row 1 and 2, it just doesn't stand out as a game that looked worth playing. And for me, I never saw any gameplay that made it seem like it was going to be worth my while. Essentially, what it was getting, for better or worse, was that it was a non-linear experience compared to your Grand Theft Auto, a little bit more gang affiliated or focused in its story, quote unquote. And for me, that just wasn't really interesting because I was enjoying Grand Theft Auto at the time, and it already wasn't something that I actively searched and played through. So it kind of already filled a need. And again, for me, until Saints Row the Third, I didn't really see the need to expand that catalog anymore.
Yeah, and for me, I never beat Saints Row 1 and 2. I mean, I'm really dating myself here, but I think this is probably one of those games that, like, I rented through whatever the Netflix of gaming was. Oh, GameFly. I think that's probably, like, I rented it through GameFly, or maybe I was working at GameStop at the time, and I took it home and, tried it out for a little bit, but it was never a game that I really dove into. It wasn't until Saints Row the Third came out, and I took a flyer on it because I remember seeing, like, gameplay videos coming out and the trailers, and I was like, man, this looks way different than the first 2. It looks kind of fun. And you really can't think of, at least as far as us, I think, in terms of maybe the first half hour of a game, I can't think of another game that really hooks you in terms of just balls to the wall, absolute silliness and action, and setting the tone for, like, the rest of the game. We both went back and played those opening sequences because that's what we wanted to remember. And in preparing for this episode, having not played through the entire story probably since 2011, if I were to go back and do it now, I probably would feel a little bit differently based off of how a lot of other people have felt now that they have gone back and played this over a decade later. But those missions are just so fun and so ridiculous. I mean, you're dangling from a helicopter and, like, shooting people with an assault rifle with one arm while you hang off of a helicopter with the other one. You're flying through the air, like, after a plane is being broken apart, and shooting people, which makes absolutely no sense. It's so stupid, but it's so much fun. And I was like, man, I'm in for something really, really special. And I was definitely brought back to that time when I was replaying it. We'll talk about the issues with the remaster a little bit later in the episode. But yeah, Eric, I mean, this is one of those games where, like, I kept, like, pounding my fist on the table for you to play, even though you had never played a Saints Row game. And I was like, dude, you're gonna love how fun and how silly this is. And then eventually you did make the jump and dive into it.
I think depending on the game that you're playing, there are a couple different mindsets that you can jump into. So the first one is story-based. If I know I'm going to be getting into a very story-driven game, I want to be gripped with the characters and the story and the world. I want all that to happen progressively, but pretty quickly at the start to kind of get me hook, line, and sinker for me to really be focused and dedicated to that story. This game is the complete opposite of that. It's just straight balls to the wall action. Phil, the game starts off with you basically robbing a bank. You then skip ahead very quickly to a helicopter chase fight. And then on top of that, you get the plane sequence on top of everything, which is one of my favorite sequences because it's so absurd, where you get on this plane, you jump out of said plane, end up back in said plane, and then you continue to plummet down to save someone. It's just an absolute just amount of fun that I didn't think was possible at that time. And for me, Phil, when we jumped into it, it was a very good memory then, and getting to play that first hour was a great time now. Yes, is the game aging? Has it aged? Absolutely. But just the moments and the absurdity alone, I think, really took this to the next level. And if you're going to be a game that is compared to a classic like Grand Theft Auto, I feel like taking the dial and turning it all the way up is probably the only thing you could do, which is why I think Saints Row the Third is viewed, at least for the most part, to be in very good light.
And you know what, like, I had totally forgotten about until, again, I watched some videos here earlier today. We didn't even get to the other really great mission in the early portion of the game, which is where you storm this syndicate, penthouse to Kanye West's power. Do you remember that mission? We didn't even get to that part.
No, and honestly, I was thinking about that, was that I had done all this stuff in this game, and we still had that to go, and I know it happened pretty early. So, again, the fact that you had all that stuff at the beginning, and then somewhere along the way, you get a dildo to fight with, this game's crazy.
Yeah, it is absolutely nuts, especially when it comes to the weapons and the over-the-top missions. Now, once again, not getting to play the game all the way through, we probably have forgotten a lot of, like, the filler missions, some of the cornier cutscenes. I'm sure a lot of the humor hasn't aged very well in 13 years. I can't even imagine what that's like watching here in current day. But again, this series is about going back to games and remembering how they made you feel. And this is one of those gems where it came out of nowhere, especially in a time where we didn't really have social media. We didn't have like TikToks or Instagram Reels telling us, hey, you guys should check out Saints Row the Third. It was purely vibes, and I was like, man, this looks like it could be interesting, and I get a little bit of a discount. I'm gonna buy the game, and that's what ended up happening. So I do feel for those people that were a little upset and disappointed that they moved away from a little bit more of the grittiness from Saints Row 1 and 2, but in terms of a company decision as far as Volition goes, like, this was a great decision. And we'll also talk about Saints Row 4 here in a moment as well, which you did not play, but I did. But yeah, just a whole lot of fun, and it can be played cooperatively if you go and play the remastered version of the game that is now available. Actually, I'm not sure if it's available as of right now. We're recording this on November 18th, but when I went and bought it the other day, it was $6. So I'm sure it's a game that goes on sale quite a bit. So if it is something that you're looking to play with your buddy and, like, you've played through all the other cooperative games, Eric, I can't even imagine how much fun we would have had playing this cooperatively, and the clips we could have come up with if that kind of like technology were available back then. Because yeah, this would be a whole lot of fun to go through and play with a friend, as far as like from beginning to end.
100%. And it was fun just for us, Phil, to get to talk about the experiences, to really bond over what we played. And while the details have absolutely escaped us, I remember what I felt when playing the game, and do this recent playthrough made some of those things quickly apparent. For example, a couple of things that stood out to me was with the gameplay. It's very simple gameplay, but it would do fun little things, like when you're sprinting and meleeing, you would just like scissor kick someone, or you'd give them the famouser, or you'd give them any type of move that you could think of, clothesline.
My favorite is when you attack them from behind and use them as like basically a skateboard.
Oh, for sure. For sure. You also had the chance to take people and use them as body shields. Like, there was a lot of those little things that added more fun to the gameplay that was already pretty absurd. And where the strengths came out, so did the weaknesses. Like, this game graphically, not aging very well, which makes sense that they would try to do a remaster. Although, again, it sounds like we'll get into how much that was really effective or not. I've heard mixed reviews on that. The game itself, though, not only doesn't age very well, but I definitely remember the fact that there wasn't a lot of variety in enemies. Yes, there were different like gangs or factions that you fought, but the grunts are essentially just fodder for you to mow down with a machine gun or with a dildo or whatever it might be. So for me,
said dildo way too many times in this episode.
Listen,
probably
this is gonna be the Diddy party version of what we did on the last episode with Ryan. If you missed that creator spotlight, probably shouldn't be up. But dildo, just wanted to say it one more time. Great experience. And I really think in that first hour of replaying it, Phil, those things were just really apparent, both in the strengths and the weaknesses. Something that I really appreciated that I remembered and I could recall, but were easily apparent at the beginning. So you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. And for me, it just made me not take the game that seriously when I first played it. And when I go to replay it so I could do this episode and talk about it, it didn't sway me in the wrong direction. I just looked at it for what it is, which is just a fun time.
Yeah, I again, like I said in the beginning, I'm very interested to hear from that camp of Saints Row fans that really did not like this game. I mean, one of the YouTube videos I watched literally was the game that killed the series. Like, that's how a lot of these fans feel. But again, if you're just trying to bring in somebody on purely vibes and purely just nonsensical fun, this was it. Like, this reminds me a lot of why I also enjoyed the first Crackdown game. Right, I think you played Crackdown as well, right? So like that was a game.
Crackdown was absolutely the comp I was hoping we'd make.
Yeah, so, and I couldn't tell you a thing about the story from Crackdown. I could remember I could give you a decent amount of story on Saints Row the Third, but like when it came down to it, Crackdown, Saints Row the Third, just fun experiences and a chance to run around an open world and create havoc. So yes, were some of those like side missions and mandatory missions a little rinse, wash, repeat? Yeah, absolutely. But there's also those fun missions where, you know, you're like committing like vehicle or insurance fraud and like throwing your body into traffic and to earn money and all that kind of stuff. And that was a fun way to like kill time. Now, would that be as much fun now? I'm not really sure, but all I know is back then I had a whole lot of fun. And when everybody, and once again, and every other producer or publisher was trying to put out some sort of GT-esque a game, this GT-esque, Grand Theft Auto-esque game. That's what I'm trying to say.
You just kept forgetting that A, man.
I really did. And then when one finally came around that was like worth your time, it was like, oh great, this is we finally got something that's a little bit different. I'm gonna at the end of this episode, Eric, we'll do the would you rather play, because there are some gems in here that I totally forgot about that I can't wait to run by you as we as we discuss this. As we wrap up the episode a little bit later. But yeah, to kind of pivot a little bit to some of the things that are definitely like not aging well in 2024. I mentioned this to you, and I would be interested to see if anybody else had this issue. I played this on my gaming monitor through my PlayStation 5, and in the really dark corridors, like especially on the plane, I could like barely see, and I adjust my brightness all the way up. I made sure my brightness on my monitor was up. So I did not get a chance to play it like on my TV, which I probably should have done to compare and contrast, but I just didn't have time. And I don't know, and I don't know if that's just a remaster thing, because in the YouTube video I watched recently as well, it looked like there were a lot of instances where it was just like incredibly dark and like it was just really hard to see what you were doing. You played on the 360 version through your Xbox One Series S. Did you have any of those issues as far as brightness or visibility?
Nothing that I wasn't expecting out of a game this old. So nothing that like stood out to me that was graphically wrong. You know, there are some shading issues, you know, throughout. There are some graphic and texture things that were not smooth. And then there were also just a lot of things about the world in general that I had critiques about. You know, driving around in this particular world, not very interesting at all. Not very lively, even though there are people or NPCs all around. So a lot of the things that I was noticing, Phil, I didn't really take it as a detriment to, like, again, not playing a remastered version. It's a little different, but I didn't really take anything to be a little weird based off my current setup. I just kind of lent that to the fact that this is a older game that I am replaying. And again, very much 360-like in its playthrough.
Yeah, and also, I only played about 45 minutes, so I'm sure a little bit later in the game it probably evened itself out. But yeah, there were just, right after you do the plane mission, you're driving around Steelport and it's nighttime, and even then I was having, like, trouble seeing what was going on. There are, as far as controller layout, it is not the best. Y is responsible for way too many things. I actually remember that from my first playthrough. Like, you could have probably, changed this up a little bit, but, like, the Y button is responsible for, or has too many responsibilities in this game. Some of that obviously hasn't done too great, but everything else is really simple. I mean, you jump in, you know how to shoot your gun, you know how to, I was totally getting distracted because I just got a Steam notification that your brother just loaded up Balatro or whatever it is, that game that we were talking about in our Discord.
God.
I've never seen him play that until just now. Now, granted, I didn't become Steam friends with him until, like, later in the year, but it just totally distracted me.
I know. And then, total side story from our Discord, we were talking about the card game that made the Game of the Year nominations, and my brother Stefan and our friend Jay are dead ass trying to convince us that they knew about this game, and I don't believe them. So
I believe Stefan does, because he's always playing something random on Steam. But yeah, but remember, like, I think this is, like, with the way I felt, I saw Jay talking about it from Super Bracket Bros. Shout out to Jay. It reminds me of how I just very fiercely defend Jurassic World Evolution 2. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this to him. So it was like the same vein.
Jeez. Well, that was a turn, Phil. Saints Row the Third.
I'm sorry. I got so distracted because I've never seen that notification come up before. And now I've talked about Balatro, or however it's pronounced, 9 times in one day. Anyway.
It's been a lot.
Saints Row the Third is not Balatro or some card game that we've never heard of. It's a very, very fun game, so very interested to see if you guys jumped in and played it. To kind of look at the series again as we fast forward. Well, actually, Eric, are there any other story beats that you want to point out other than the ones that we've talked about in the very beginning? Because I think it is kind of telling that a lot of the stuff that we remember the most is in the beginning of the game and not so much towards the middle and end.
Yeah, I think for me, this is a game that once you kind of get bought into it, you're just going to sink a lot of time into it, especially at that time. I'd be curious what other games came out around the same time that would have taken our attention. But for me, I just really enjoyed the fact that you'd build up your reputation. The story was just absurd. This game really stands out. I mean, first off, compared to the first two, it immediately shifted gears. It went full purple. It went full obnoxious, raunchy, all of the things that I think were appealing at that time for an audience that was clamoring for something a little different, but still in somewhat of the realm of things that they know and like. So it's going to be interesting, Phil, because I absolutely see both sides. I think Saints Row the Third is the best game out of everything I've seen from this franchise. Again, my limited experience. But I can absolutely see where it kind of took this franchise to a whole different direction with the fourth one, and in turn kind of leads us to where we are now. So it's definitely a pivoting point. I think in the moment, a really good pivoting point. Looking back, maybe not so much.
Well, Eric, 2011 was a pretty busy year for gaming. So here are some of the games that came out in 2011. Portal 2, which I didn't play. Did you play Portal 2? You played through Portal 2, didn't you? Or no?
Like, casually. Again, It was one of those games that I remember playing, but do I remember going through it? No.
Got it. Well, Portal 2 obviously was that might have been Game of the Year if it wasn't this other game I'll mention here in a moment. Infamous 2, which I was playing the hell out of on my PlayStation 3. Uncharted 3 came out this year. Dead Space 2, Eric. Batman Arkham City, little game called Batman Arkham City. LA Noire came out the year. If you were wondering which Call of Duty was out at that time, it was Modern Warfare 3. So there you go. Battlefield 3, Gears of War 3. Lots of threes, Jesus Christ. Resistance 3. And Eric, this game came out that I think you've heard of. It's called Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. So, like, I don't know if you were playing through that.
I guess I didn't.
You might have been preoccupied.
I don't know how much of Saints Row the Third I played, because outside of the PlayStation games you mentioned, because I did not own a PS3 at the time.
Bulletstorm.
I played all of those.
Bulletstorm,
yes.
We dabbled in. Crisis 2, we dabbled in.
Crisis underrated.
Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I also very much played. Dragon Age 2 came out that year, so like 2011 was crazy. Jesus, these are, and we're not even taking it into account. We were still playing like Madden, and I was playing 2K. Dead Island, the first one, we played that with some friends. So 2011 was an insane year. So the fact that we fit in Saints Row the Third, what
a
happened?
life! What a life to be able to just play games all day, every day at that time. Because that's the only way. That's the only way that I played this much of Saints Row, when arguably it's the worst game out of everything you just named.
You can make the argument, yeah. Well, I think it's definitely better than Bulletstorm, but the rest of those, you could definitely have a conversation. Were you about to make an argument pro Bulletstorm? Is that what you're about to do? Okay.
No. Bulletstorm is one of those stupid-ass games that we just try.
Should have been fun.
We should have a whole episode of games we just, like, dabbled in, because Bulletstorm is, like, a perfect example of that. They wanted that to hit so hard.
Yeah, that was from the people, I think, that did Gears of War, I believe, right? So it was like their first foray into something else. They're like, because it was like stylistically very similar, but it was obviously very silly too. But 2011 was a crazy year when it comes to a bunch of other games that came out. So the fact that we fit Saints Row the Third in amidst all that other stuff, like especially like Modern Warfare 3, I'm sure a Halo had come out like the year before that, so we were probably still playing that here and there. Assassin's Creed Revelations. So to kind of pivot into like where the series went from there, because sales wise it did great. I mean, as far as when you look at a graph, Saints Row 1, Saints Row 2, and then Saints Row the Third, it was a huge uptick in terms of sales. The reception was solid. Metacritic scores in the 80s. IGN gave it an 8.5. Official Xbox Magazine gave it a 9.5. That's a little overzealous, but that's fine. Official Xbox Magazine is probably why you're not around anymore, I don't think. But an 8.5 from IGN is pretty solid. And then, you have Saints Row 4 come out, which I don't have what year it came out here. But Saints Row 4, I did play. You did not. And one thing that's very clear is that they made sure that Saints Row the Third is basically not canon, which Saints Row the Third is like so silly that who cares? Like, it doesn't really matter. But Saints Row 4, to revisit that time, Eric, why didn't you play Saints Row 4? Because you did enjoy the third one so much. Was it you had just heard from word of mouth that it wasn't very good, or was there just something in there that just didn't interest you in terms of where the series was going?
So we mentioned earlier, a game like this, when you're being compared to another great franchise in a similar vein, sometimes, especially if that game is a little more serious, a little bit more linear, sometimes it's okay to copy the things that you like about that, and then also take what you have and turn that dial of craziness all the way up. Well, for the fourth one, I was able to tell they were going to turn that dial, break the dial, and continue to turn it. Because we went from, jumping out of planes and these like cinematic feats of fun and silliness and raunchiness and all of that, to just absurd levels of absurdity, where you're basically now superhuman, you have superpowers, you have a ridiculous presidential storyline as like your main kind of get for this game. It just didn't seem like once we started to introduce like a bunch of supernatural and things like that, once we get aliens in the mix, which I think the third did have a little bit of, but once you really dive into that and you make that your whole thing, now we've lost sense of the plot. And for some people, that works as a repetitive game. I think for that type of game, you really only have one real shot to make that impression. And then you got to show me a little bit more. And from everything I remember leading up to the fourth, there was just nothing that made it stand out to where, oh man, I have to play it. Here's the third, and the fourth is going to bring it to a whole nother level of gameplay, of visuals, of graphics. None of that seemed prevalent at that time. And I'm sure, Phil, if we look at the games around that time, you know, years later, we just talked about how much time in 2011 we had to play all those games. Well, years later, I'm now more of an adult than ever. I'm having less time to play games. So I'm sure that's also another part of it, is that I just ran out of time, and Saints Row 4 just didn't fit into my queue at that time for games I could or wanted to play the most.
Yeah, and I'm going to go through the 2013 releases here in just a moment, and it's kind of very fitting that even in a 2-year span, our attention spans and what we wanted out of our games in 2 years completely changed. So I'll bring up those titles here in just a moment. But yeah, like you said, you have those superpowers, and it's essentially like Saints Row the Third wasn't really part of the canon, part of the storyline. I do apologize for the Saints Row heads here that we have taken this long to mention Johnny Gat, because he is such an iconic character for this series and very, very much an important part of 1 and 2, and then he's unceremoniously killed off screen in the third, which definitely is one of my bigger gripes with that decision. Like, if you're going to kill off an iconic character, fine, but like to do it in that unceremonious fashion was definitely a huge bummer for a lot of people. And then he's just fine in Saints Row 4. Also, depending on the ending, spoilers for Saints Row the Third, Shondi is alive again in Saints Row 4, so all that is thrown out the window. And there are a lot of those fun, silly elements in Saints Row 4. And honestly, to a point, there is a lot of fun to be had in having superpowers and punching the shit out of pedestrians. That's not going to get old. That's actually a very Crackdown-esque. That's one of the reasons we love Crackdown, is because you could, like, jump in the air and fly around town. But, like, those were just things that I wasn't necessarily looking for in a game, and they really doubled down on that, Volition and Deep Silver in Saints Row 4, and it just wasn't as fun. I think this one also got reviewed pretty well. Let me pull it up right now. Yeah, more so like high to mid 70s for Metacritic. Destructoid gave this a 9.5. What the hell happened there? GameStop 7.5, IGN 7.3, Polygon a 9. So it was still reviewed very well, but again, when you're talking about your core fan base that already didn't really enjoy the third game, to really even more so dive into the quirkiness and the silliness in this one, really didn't bode well for the core fans, to the point where, again, this game went away for a very, very long time. So unfortunately, it just didn't stick, and I know for a fact I did not beat Saints Row 4. It was probably another one of those rentals that I hung on for a little bit, got my feet wet, and then returned it to wherever it was, wherever it is I got it from. So, 2013, Eric. What happened in 2013? A couple of games that I know for a fact we played. Injustice: Gods Among Us, even though we're not big fighting game fans, that one was a whole lot of fun. Tomb Raider, the Tomb Raider reboot, we played the hell out of that for sure in 2013. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, probably the last Assassin's Creed we ever played all the way through. That one was really, really solid. Some other games that I know for a fact that you played. There's a game called BioShock Infinite. Remember that one? That one was pretty good in 2013.
That would explain it.
And then two other games in 2013 that came out, Eric. The Last of Us and Grand Theft Auto 5. So, why would we play Saints Row 4 when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out?
No, 100%.
Chance.
Between that and BioShock, like, absolutely. And I know I was later on the Last of Us train, but that explains it for you. And then BioShock for me, Grand Theft Auto for both of us. Like, yeah, why would we play this game? Or the expansion Gat from Hell.
Gat from Hell.
I don't know. I didn't know that was a thing.
Gat from Hell. Yeah, he goes to hell and fights Satan, if I remember correctly.
Once again, it's just like, that's fine, and there's an audience for that. But I think at a certain point, it's just a little bit too much. And again, there are franchises that make a living off of that. Like, I was never a Duke Nukem guy. You know, that just wasn't a game of mine. There are those type of games that are absurd and get crazier and have those, like, periods where they're insane like that. I can only do so much of that because it's already not my genre to begin with.
Yeah, and Call of Duty Ghost came out that year, so it was like a new Call of Duty. I mean, Ghost was not very good, but we still put a lot of time into it. For me, Pokemon X and Y had also come out on the 3DS, so that took up a lot of my time. I know this is going to sound funny because it's the second Lego game we brought up, but Lego Marvel Superheroes came out, and that was like right in the middle of the MCU, so like having that game was a big deal. So yeah, it just failed to really capture the same magic as Saints Row the Third. And not only that, like I mentioned, like our interests were changing and we were looking for something different in our games. I think this was the year that the PS4 and the Xbox One, Xbox, I was like, what did they call that Xbox? This is the same year that came out. So that was where our focus was elsewhere. So it just really failed to capitalize on the momentum from the third game. But to talk about, I will bring this up here because I do want to make sure the people that are really, really big fans of the first two games, this is from the Saints Row subreddit from about a year ago. Is it fair to say that Saints Row the Third ruined the perception of the series? I've been a fan since the original, and it's always bugged me when people call Saints Row an over-the-top, silly version of GTA. I mean, it is. Saints Row 1 and 2 weren't that at all. They were a perfect balance of genuine emotion with amazing characters and crazy fun with their own identity. And because of Saints Row 3 and the following games, it's become a series no one takes seriously anymore. I think my biggest letdown with the reboot was the reveal poster with the wall and, a little bit more there. And then a lot of comments, people saying a lot of the same thing. And I honestly did not know that the dedicated fan base of the series does not like Saints Row the Third. And that video I watched earlier today, 40 minutes, Eric, of just shitting on the game. Well, I won't say that because they say the parts that we talk about, the first part of the game, spoken very, very in very, very high regard. But yeah, it really surprised me that they were not the fan base was not a fan of the third. And looking as to how the series ended up and where it went after 3, I guess I kind of understand. Like, if you like that nitty gritty Saints Row 1 and 2 storytelling, and then you got dildo bats in Saints Row the Third and flying around as a superhero in 4, and then Johnny Gat goes to hell in a DLC, I guess I kind of understand why you'd be upset about that.
Yeah, and the customization was another thing I don't even think we talked about, like getting to create your character. That was such a fun little wrinkle to everything to make the experience a little bit different for everybody. So when you're playing through, I don't know about you, Phil, I definitely took a solid 10 minutes to make my character for my replay. Why did I do that? Can't tell you. I got problems. But I will say none of this surprised me as far as reception. I didn't know that the first two were more highly regarded for the core fan base, but it doesn't surprise me because it seemed like the core fan base for Saints Row 1 and 2, and then the new fan base that kind of liked the third and maybe the fourth and then fell off, both of those groups didn't seem excited for the reboot, which neither you or me played. And honestly, Phil, I don't think that's surprising at all because it seems like the people that did play it didn't enjoy it either.
Yeah, where this series ended up is kind of baffling. Really quick, I want to. I asked ChatGPT to kind of summarize one of the longer comments in that subreddit question, and here's what they did. The critique argues that Saints Row the Third set a flawed standard for the series by focusing on wacky gimmicks over the balance of storytelling and gameplay seen in Saints Row 2. Volition and Deep Silver misunderstood the third's success, abandoning the gangster roots in favor of exaggerated humor and sci-fi elements, which alienated longtime fans. Game journalists reinforced this shift by praising the third's superficial features while overlooking its weak plot, shallow characters, and reduced customization. The reboot's reliance on the third's tone rather than Saints Row 2's balance reflects this misstep. While the third is fun, the author finds it overrated compared to 2's stronger narrative, character depth, and blend of humor and grounded action. So, yeah, I totally get that, especially when, like I said, when, people loved the story and the characters of the third of Saints Row 2. I can't really tell you too much about the third's characters, like personality or anything like that. I'd be pressed to give you any type of details when it comes to those characters. So, yeah, like I said, this game went away for quite a long time, and we somehow ended up with Saints. When did that come out? 2020? Because it kept getting delayed.
Maybe right after, yeah.
Let's
2021,
see. 2022.
Yeah.
2022. And remember, we got like a trailer for the game a long time before that had come out. And it was, it finally released in 2022, and it was just a disaster. We don't throw around stupid terms like woke and all that BS that people think, want to say when they're trying to be edgy on the internet. But like Saints Row is the perfect example of them trying to like appeal to everybody, not one specific fan base. Like the thing with Saints Row is like you knew who your audience was, and the new Saints Row 2022 was like, hey, everybody can kind of enjoy this thing, like whatever the hell it is, and it just, none of it looked any fun. It looked like the most bland map you've ever seen. All the characters were cringe as hell. The gunplay didn't even look any fun. All the silliness had basically been removed. And I joked about this in the pre-show, like, because you thought that I had gone through and played this, because I had talked about it with, like, Boogie and Jordan. I was like, hey, maybe we should try it out, because it was, like, one of the PlayStation free games. But this is one of those YouTube rabbit holes that I've gone down when it comes to this game, because, again, very dedicated fan base. This is even something I didn't touch. I had no desire to go in and play it. It just didn't look interesting whatsoever. It didn't seem to have any type of redeeming qualities. There was never any video that I watched that was like, yeah, but it's a terrible game, but it does do this pretty well. None of that existed. So that's when the series is pretty much in the ground. I don't know what it would take for them to revive it at this point, Eric. It seems like this is just over and done with, and that is definitely upsetting, because there certainly is a space for a game like this to exist alongside a GTA or any other open world game you want to throw out there.
100%. I mean, that's 100% true. I think, Phil, that it's a shame, really, because the game on the surface seems like it improved graphically and that it was going back to its roots. And that didn't seem to really appeal to the people that were alienated by the third and fourth game. And it definitely didn't appeal to people who liked the third and fourth game. So it was a very weird dynamic for us to get into, and the fact that it basically flopped is not a surprise, not a shock, and the fact that the franchise is probably dead, also not surprising or a shock. So I don't know where it goes from here. I think if you're going to bring back this game, you have to lean into stuff, but to a certain extent. And you also have to bring new elements into the fray. Again, we talked about the opening to the game. If you're not going to be a story-driven game, I need to be having fun from pressing start. There's no negotiation. And if you want to be a story-driven game, you really have to focus on that narrative and have very engaging gameplay behind it to support the story. There's so many things like that that I think games do very well and certain franchises do very well. Saints Row has always had little elements of all of this, but never put it all together. And at this point, 4 games and a reboot in, I don't think they're gonna get to that point. And I think they should just stop trying. It's too late. That ship has sailed.
It is a bummer, because in a gaming landscape where Ubisoft releases the same Far Cry game every year, you're telling me that like you couldn't come up with at least a fun Saints Row, and you had so many years to do it. Like, yeah, I still play the Far Cry games, but that's mostly because of cooperative play. I couldn't tell you a thing about the story in Far Cry 5, but the fact that they couldn't nail this, and that's such a good point, Eric, like it didn't appeal to either audience. Like, who was this for? it's not like Gen Z was playing it, millennials weren't playing it. Like, no one was playing this game. The scores obviously reflect that as well. 60s for Metacritic, 6 out of 10 GameSpot, 6 out of 10 IGN. Game Informer gave it a 8.5. That's why you guys are also not around anymore. Game Informer.
Man, Game Informer getting it.
Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, so like it was just not received very well. I think they did state that it was profitable, but like not in the terms of like, you know, continuing to make the series and keeping it around. So it is a huge bummer. I don't think this is something I will ever visit, even though it's like in my library technically. Just not something that I really ever want to play, and I don't see this being one of those games that YouTube 5 years from now, like similar to like Days Gone, right? Like I understand why there was an audience for Days Gone. All this time later, you can just type in Days Gone, and there's a million YouTube videos about why it was a good game. That doesn't exist for Saints Row, unfortunately. So, in terms of the core series, Eric, before I talk about some of these other open world games, is there anything else you want to mention about this? At least we got to fondly remember Saints Row the Third. I'll just say that, like, I mean, $6. I'll go back and play Saints Row the Third maybe at some point, way before I play the reboot. That's for sure.
I think it'd be a fun game to put on stream one day and just absolutely go through the craziness. I would be down to do the co-op campaign, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you. That would be interesting. I would be curious. So there's elements of that game that even today stand out. And this was just a great game to get back to our roots for this episode, where we can reminisce about a game, but also critique the game and or franchise in what I think is a pretty healthy and very transparent way. So I think, let's jump into this last piece and kind of wrap this up. I think we said everything that there can be, and honestly, argument can be made. Too much was said about Saints Row the Third, because I do still think you and me love this game way more than the average person.
Oh, for sure. So, if anything, if you've never played a Saints Row game, definitely go and play the third one if you're looking for a lot of silliness. And the first two, again, are very highly praised by its core fans. But here are some of the games, Eric, that I just looked up, like GTA clones, and this is a list from Game Rant about the 10 best GTA clones ever made. I'm going to throw out some of these that I'm pretty sure you've played. Would you rather play Saints Row the Third or Sunset Overdrive?
I only dabbled in Sunset Overdrive,
Okay.
so I will say Saints Row the Third.
Okay. Sunset Overdrive is outstanding. We've talked about it quite a bit with our friends over at Friendly Neighborhood Gamers. It's certainly a game that I think deserves like a remaster or a reboot in 2024, because, yeah, it is great. That one was made by Insomniac, so they really cut their teeth on that one to make Spider-Man. So, Crackdown. Crackdown is Saints Row the Third.
That is really tough. I can't remember if I like Crackdown 1 or 2. I think it's Crackdown 2 that I enjoy more. I know we didn't like 3.
Yeah. 3 we didn't even really play, because 3 was the one that took forever to come out. And I don't think we ever played it.
And then it was so different. It looked so different, I believe, as well. I'm going to say Saints Row the Third, but man, shout out to Crackdown, dude. That was fun. That was a fun game.
I don't think we could ever do like a full episode on it, but it's a good game.
It is a discussion point for sure.
Yeah, here we go. This is the one I forgot about, Scarface.
All right, now, hold on.
The Scarface game is so much fun.
Do you guys know? We could do an episode on that one, the Scarface game.
I wonder if is that available on Steam? I would totally replay Scarface.
That's
you
tough.
could probably emulate it.
I'll go Saints Row the Third, because I think the gameplay is probably stronger. But man, Scarface is hidden gem there.
Yeah. What about, did you play, I don't think you played this version, but didn't you play a Getaway game on the Xbox 360? Was it Getaway, or maybe I'm thinking of Driver? What was the game that you played on the Xbox 360?
Stuntman Ignition?
Stuntman. That's not an open world game. Maybe that's not what I'm thinking of. I'll skip that one. Did you play any of the Mafia games? 1, 2, or 3?
No, Mafia wasn't my thing.
Okay. Mafia 1, very good. The third one was very repetitive, but I played that one all the way through. Have you ever played Simpsons Hit and Run?
I recall Simpsons Hit and Run, but not to the point where I could speak on it, so I'd have to pick Saints Row.
yeah, Simpsons Hit and Run. That is absolutely a game that deserves a remaster or just a brand new game in the 2020s. And then the last one, which I think is kind of like the GTA quote unquote clone, Sleeping Dogs. Have you ever played Sleeping Dogs?
No, Sleeping Dogs, I think you mentioned it at the beginning, is one that we probably need to jump into a little more. Always been a fan of it from afar, though. It seems like it has that same type of
true
appeal.
crime series. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was going to be True Crime Hong Kong, and then they renamed it to Sleeping Dogs. But yeah, that one is one I actually own that game on the PS4 disc because they've never remastered it for PS5. But that's a game that I'll jump into maybe once or twice a year just to reminisce and have a lot of fun with. Yeah, in terms of like GTA clones, that is the one that comes to mind, and then Saints Row 2 is number one on this list. But
if I could go back in time, I would play Sleeping Dogs over Watchdog.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't blame you for that. I definitely don't blame you for that, which is a bummer because they're doing this weird thing with Watch Dogs, and we'll end on this because Watch Dogs doesn't deserve this much time. But the Watch Dogs 1, obviously pretty bland, not very good. Watch Dogs 2, excellent. And then Watch Dogs, whatever the new one was called, where they're in London and there's like no main character, awful. So they're doing like bad, good, bad. So maybe the next Watch Dogs game will be really good again. But yeah, that was another one of those games we had very high hopes for, but unfortunately it did not come to fruition. So yeah, guys, moral of the story is Saints Row 3rd, hell of a lot of fun. Go check it out if you have not done so already. Eric, anything else you want to mention? Any other comparisons you want to make before we wrap up this episode? Otherwise, I think we had a good time on this one, which again has not necessarily been the case on the Game Room this year, unfortunately. We're hoping to have more hits than misses in 2025.
Yeah, well, listen, next month, Marvel Rivals comes out, and we plan on covering
Hopefully
that.
That doesn't suck.
Well, you said you enjoyed the beta and all of that, so I mean, things are looking up. Well, what the fuck do I know?
Play the beta.
I
didn't get invited.
That's so sad. A lot of good
all over again.
A lot of good vibes around that one. It's always interesting to do games that we are excited that are coming out, but we don't know whether or not we're going to like them. So to sandwich this one in between, a few different games this year that haven't really worked out, that we've tried for the first time, going down memory lane with this one, a good thing. And probably we're overcompensating for those other episodes by making this one too long. So we appreciate you if you stuck with us. But yeah, I think it's time to put this one to bed.
Absolutely. If you would like to listen to the rest of the Game Room Where It Happens library, you can find everything you need in the Linktree link in the show notes. You'll find all the rest of our content, including our social media pages, and the most important ones to keep up with being Instagram, TikTok, our growing Discord page, YouTube, as well as Twitch, where we stream each and every other Thursday. If you want to support the show, you can do a couple of things. You can head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening, and wherever you can, leave us a 5-star review or whatever the highest possible review is that you can leave. It's one of the most important things to a podcast. It helps us get out to new listeners, which is obviously very helpful. You can also share the content, tag us, let us know you're listening, and let other people know that you are listening as well. We're turning the corner into December here very shortly, which is crazy. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, we are off next week. Is that right?
We are.
Okay.
But if you did miss out on our interviews at Ocala Comic Con, you can check that up. That episode went up right before this one, actually. So you could check that out if you haven't seen the clips or you weren't able to catch that on social media. They're all put together in one episode on audio and video. So check that out to make up for the time off. But we're going to make that up by the end of the year with a couple of extra episodes. So stay tuned.
Yeah, December is going to be busy, and we still have a What Did I Miss episode planned for the month of November as well as December, as we welcome back in Philin and Jordan to wrap up the year. But if you find yourself just, there's just not enough Wait For It podcast. I need more. I want more of Phil and Eric. Well, there is a way that you can do that, and Eric will let you know a little bit more about that right now.
Yeah, so of course you're able to go ahead and do all the free stuff, which is very much appreciated, or you could take those dollar bills and you could send them on over to us over on Patreon, where in exchange for that monetary support, you can get behind the scenes and early access to episodes like this one, in addition to a couple of other perks that we are working on going into 2025. Shout out to Briar, T3 Kato, Stefan, and Corey, our patrons that are supporting the show currently. Come on and join the gang. Otherwise, do the stuff that always works and that only take a moment of your time. The likes, the comments, the shares, the listens, the engagement, all of it very much appreciated. With all that being said, my name is Mr. Eric Almighty. That is my co-host, Phil the Filipino. And please don't forget, we release new episodes every Wednesday on the podcast. And we have bonus content on platforms like TikTok and Twitch. All you got to do is wait for it.
So, I heard you're looking for a go-to source for entertainment.
Wait for it.
Gaming?
Wait for it.
Anime?
Plus Ultra!
Mr. Eric Almighty and Phil the Filipino? Yeah, they've got you covered. And all you gotta do is wait for it. This is the Wait For It podcast.